Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You are about to listen to the Loops and Lifecycles podcast with Josh Mason. When you hear a new idea, do you wonder, can I put this into practice in what I'm doing? Join Josh Mason and guests as they dig into concepts from multiple disciplines to find ways to improve our business, our security, and our lives. Enjoy this episode, and remember that knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Welcome to Loops and Lifecycles. Today I've got with me Bryson Bort. I'm honored to have you here, Bryson. People know your background, or they'll get it from the notes if they go look for you. I want to dig into how you've gotten where you are. You're West Point grad, correct? And you've started a couple companies. You've done a lot of great stuff in the cybersecurity community, in the veteran community. One of the things that got me started with Loops and Lifecycles is looking at how we continue to grow, how we continue to build things better than they were before. How do you have a mindset or a mantra yourself that drives you? Because I know that you're building and building on the things that you've done in the past.
Question I get a lot is like, how do you do it? And the first answer is I don't do it. It is we. I've been fortunate to have the coaches, the mentors, the friends, the acquaintances, the colleagues, the folks to work with, the folks to work for. And it is iterating through that, which is why integrity and kindness are so important, because that's what leads to those relationships expanding and being able to do all of these things. The other piece is I've always been able to simplify things. I look at however complex it is, and I'm able to break it down, and that has two advantages. First of all, it's easy to get your hands around it in terms of then being able to establish where you want to go with it. And then again, going back to nobody does this alone, it's a team. That's how you communicate that vision. And so my leadership style, I call it the Rubik's Cube. I don't want to tell you what to do, because you issue a command to somebody and they go and try to do it, and the world keeps changing. We say in the Army, no plan survives first contact. The same leadership style I learned in the military, I think, applies very well to the civilian world, which is that Rubik's Cube is giving you commander's intent, left-right limits, and an understanding of the context of the why for those decisions. And so that now empowers you to go and build your piece that ties to these other pieces, despite the fact that all of those things are going to be changing both individually and at a macro level.
Yeah, that's huge. One of the things that we taught at the Special Operations School, and what we went by was strategy to task. As a platoon commander or as an aircraft commander, you set out on a mission given a tasking. You can't call back all the time and get feedback of, hey, I'm going to do this now. I'm going to do this now. No, there's a strategy that you're a part of, and you were given a task. Now you're going to go operate that. I love that. It sounds like that's what you do with your people, with your teams, is this is the strategy that we've all agreed to. I'm not going to pick your tactics. Go forth and be part of the strategy.
Yeah. And then that's where I think the phrase servant leadership gets overused. To me, how that fits in there is, hey, you've got your piece. How can I help? Where can I coach? Where can I connect? Where can I be a force multiplier to things that I'm doing at this greater macro, not greater, but macro scale that can tie back into your project? And how do I work for you to work with us?
Yeah, that's huge. What do you see yourself building on the most right now? I know you've got Scythe that's full speed ahead. You've got ICS Village. Where do you see the biggest growth nowadays?
So ICS Village is with Tom Van Norman. He's my co-founder. We've been a 501c3 for 7 years now, although the village itself predates that. And so there are two different challenges, because when you're a nonprofit, when you're a volunteer-led organization, volunteers are easy to show up for the big events, and then they disappear when the hard work needs to be done after and before the events. And that has been a large part of us trying to scale our team and our structure so that we have volunteers who are more than just at the moment. And we've got that now. We've got some great folks on board, too many to give shout out to, but they're the ones now who've been enabling us to keep that up, because it's a lot on me and Tom. Similarly, that's been the trajectory at Scythe, although we're a for-profit. And I teach a class on entrepreneurship that I first unveiled at DEF CON about 4 years ago, and I've been updating and teaching it because the catalyst was so many folks would come to me and you're sort of thing like, how do you do this? And I was like, well, why don't I show you, right? Let me show you the nuts and the bolts and the thinking and all of those pieces to starting a company. And I'm still learning. I'm learning every day, and I'm only so far down the path. And the biggest inflection point for a growth startup, which is different than a services startup, Grimm was a consultancy that started with me, one person, and grew. But you grow organically as you earn that business and build that relationship. A growth startup doesn't work that way. You need a pile of cash to build something to then go and try to sell. And the reason the valuations are what they are is because in a services business, an hour of time equals an hour of revenue. In a product business, it's whatever a customer is willing to pay. But that first inflection point is the A round. So a seed stage company, you've got some money, you're pretty much a ragtag special forces crew. There's 5 to 15 of you. You're all talking to each other every day, and you're just in there constantly trying to figure out who's going to invent the 25th hour of the day to do the other idea that you have. The A round is the first chance you've got to invest in the idea. Hey, that thing that we've been cutting out part-time of a person, we can hire 2 people to do that. We can specialize. We can do these different things. But the reason that it's such an inflection point is because it's the greatest delta of growth in your organization people-wise. Because you grow from 5 to 15, you're going to be growing to 25 to 75. And later on, you're going to continue to grow, but you have a larger base. And so the hardest part to that is, I call it the wilderness, is the phase you go through. You're trying to solve all of these people challenges at the same time. You're trying to scale leadership because you need more leaders. You're now a large enough organization, you need some middle managers, senior managers and directors. And you're trying to hire all these individual contributors, plus figure out the folks from the previous company, the previous instance of the company, who's going to stay because it now is a different company. It looks different. And you're trying to do all 4 of those at the same time. And then in addition, your product, your technical product, was duct tape and baling wire because of all the compromises of being a low-funded company. And now you've got to be an enterprise-grade product. And so all of that takes about 18 to 24 months. And so I'm grateful we got through both of those challenges at Scythe. And so coming into 2024, we have the people on the technical side. We have leadership that's executing. So that's my focus now is they're running the company. I tell this to my leadership all the time. I was like, you run this company. I don't run this company. Yeah, I'm the ultimate authority. I the sign off. I'm the vision, the strategy, but I'm not running it. I'm out doing my pieces, and they're the ones who are actually doing all of those things that delight customers.
You guys are a product company. You're building out software. Do you see parallels between the software development process and the business development process, the company development process?
What do you mean?
The idea of getting an MVP out there, you get it to a point where it works, it runs on its own, you put in a bunch of effort to just get that usable product. Sounds like that startup phase, and then your A round being the MVP is out there, people can touch it, people can use it, and now you're sprinting, you're going through sprints to iterate, add features, add value? Or am I grasping at straws? I may be.
You're in the ballpark. You don't raise the A round until you're past MVP, right? MVP is minimum viable product for somebody to buy something. And sometimes you're going to raise a seed with pre-revenue, which means you don't even have MVP yet. We raised in that state, but some folks do have some level of MVP and revenue before they raise the seed. But now the idea is starting to validate the idea to a level of scale because, and there's a silver lining to 2022 where valuations came back to earth. And previous to that, you remember the press releases. I raised $11 billion, and everybody was just so fascinated with those numbers. And the reality is, in fact, I have a close friend who raised a lot of money within, I want to say it was about 8 to 10 months of his A round. And I felt bad for him. And I was just like, man, I don't know how you're going to deploy that capital effectively because they're giving you money that they want to put in play. And it's just sit there again, going back to that people problem in the base. How do you effectively put that money into motion? How do you deploy it? It's not easy. And so that's why these things have to be incremental. And so both the product and the people side are very much lockstep in that maturity and proof in the market, both in terms of internal execution and then, of course, how the market reacts to the product idea itself.
Because that hierarchy, you can try to build it as fast as possible, but I can't see that working well if you don't have the mechanisms in place and the trust in place, and you've trained the leadership to be leaders to other leaders. Yeah. Wow. I hadn't thought about that. You see all these 8, 9, 10 digit valuations, and you're like, oh, that's great for them.
It is a millstone, because whatever that number is, you better get above it. And that's why there's been the bloodbath in the market since the capital market said, we're not giving you 30 to 50x anymore. You're now 6 to 12. And so those companies that had been unicorns, raised $1 billion, or not raised, but were valued over $1 billion, suddenly now had to work with the fact that they had put all that capital into play at a valuation that they need to get over. Only now you're at a third to a fifth of what that previous valuation was in terms of how the market now looks at you. That's why you've been seeing the layoffs and the trickle through the environment. And this is why it's been a really rough year. 2022 and 2023 have been rough years. I'll give you some more statistics to give some light to that. Before 2022, the classic financial model was called a triple double. So in your first 2 years, you needed to be growing at a triple growth rate and then a double. And those were the top performing companies. That was the aspiration that you needed to have. And that's rarefied air. And then the rest of us are a little bit more median. But that was the model that you wanted to aspire to. The average startup growth rate in 2022 was 50%. The average startup growth rate in 2023 was 30%. So huge difference in how the market has responded and what.
So let's after action this. What can we take away? We're in a startup. You are in a mature startup. What sort of things should we be thinking? I imagine these are things you're already thinking.
I'm going to challenge you. I would not be defined as a mature startup.
More mature than where we are.
A mature startup would be a D-round startup. It's more than wearing a monocle and sipping tea with the gents. That is not what a mature startup makes. It's funny. So my background is military and the intelligence community. When I started Grimm 11 years ago, consultancies, again, the model is you grow organically. You have to run a business that's in the black all the time. You're not raising money. You don't want to raise money. This isn't how it works. You succeed, you grow slowly, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And that model is, again, as we described, is not the growth startup model. And so it's ironic because I was looked down upon by the VC community because of my background. You're an East Coast guy because most of the capital is out in the West Coast, particularly back then. You have a national security background. That means you don't really understand commercial markets. And you have a conservative mindset because you built a consultancy, and that's not the kind of, we don't think you can really have a growth startup mindset where you need to be pouring cash, throw it down the drain to grow. Yeah. And it's funny because that's what's come back in vogue, right? That's now where we're at, is the blocking and tackling, the 101 of business fundamentals turns out to still be the way you should do things. And so that's where a lot of folks are now coming back to.
So doubling down on our connecting, our networking, our getting in front of the customer and really rooting out what their problems are and how we can create solutions together.
But it's less that, right? Because sales and making money solves all problems. It's I just signed $100 million with the U.S. contract, $100 million contract with the U.S. government. Great, your problems are solved, right? I don't see many of those floating around. Sales, making money solves all problems, right? You make money and forget everything. You're good. The challenge is the expenses and the investments you can control, right? There's 3 components to a growth startup. The first 2 are obvious to any business. Revenue minus expense. And by definition, a growth startup is negative because it's growth. I'm trying to do that. Which is the third component, which is what's the strength of your investors? What's the ability to get more money because things take longer than you expect, which happens a lot. And kind of can control that, but it realistically, lasting as long as possible, persistence, keeping your burn as low as you can, being efficient, to me is the real key. And that's what is king and queen today.
Thank you so much, Bryson. It was great to have you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Loops and Lifecycles podcast with Josh Mason, part of the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then add this show to your favorite podcast player. Subscribe to the ITSP Magazine YouTube channel and share the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to connect your brand to our conversations and our audience, visit itspmagazine.com to learn how to sponsor one or more of our shows. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.